Let's take a look at our processing options. Here in Bids, we can right-click on a cube and select Process. Now, if we've made changes to our project since the last time we've deployed, we may see a message box display asking us if we want to redeploy the project, which will be necessary before we can continue with processing. Here in the Process Cube dialog box, we can see our object that we're going to process, in this case the cube, and we have the process options where we see the various choices. For example, if we decide to use process incremental, we'll need to provide a query. So we get this link configure that we need to click, and then we would specify the measure group and then the table or query that we're going to use. So it's possible we could store our incremental data in a separate table used for incremental updates, but more commonly we use queries where we can write a select statement with a where clause to be very specific about the rows that we want to update, maybe today's transactions. Or if we do a process full, then the cube will be emptied out and reloaded with fresh data, and all of the indexes and aggregations will be recalculated. In addition to process options, we have batch settings. Now, if we were working with integration services and setting up a processing task, we could select multiple cubes for processing, and then we'd be able to specify whether we're processing in parallel or sequentially. And if there are any objects that have a dependency on the objects that we're processing, we could force them to be processed here by selecting this checkbox. And if there are any errors, we can control what happens. For example, if we encounter a key in the fact table that does not match with anything found in the dimensions, we can convert it to the unknown member. Or we can ask analysis services to discard or ignore that record. Now, by default, analysis services is going to stop on the first error that it encounters. But sometimes during development, we may know that we have dirty data. And so we may want to just get something loaded into the cube just to test out a few things in our design. So we can ignore the errors count. But for production purposes, this would not be recommended. Or we could specify a threshold. Maybe we'd allow a certain number of errors to occur before we stop processing. We can also simply say stop logging after a certain number of records have occurred, and then allow processing to continue. Then under certain conditions, we can specify whether we want to ignore the error, report the error in a log and continue processing, or report the error in a log and stop processing. We can do this if a key is not found, or if we run into a duplicate key issue, or if the key column in the fact table is null and we're converting it to unknown, or if we want the null key simply to cause a problem. We don't want to allow it. And then last here we have the option of specifying a path for our error log. And so that is our processing dialog box. If we click Run, we can actually watch the processing occur. We'll be able to see the amount of time that it takes because the start time and the end time will be logged. And then for each measure group here, we can see the queries that are associated with each partition. So if we're getting results that we don't expect, we can always come here and select View Details to retrieve the entire query. We can just copy this into the clipboard and then go to Management Studio and paste that query into a query window and execute the query and do some diagnostics from there. Notice that we're not only processing the individual partitions, but we can see that we're building aggregations and indexes for partitions as well, and that's because we're doing a full processing, which will process both data and indexes as well as aggregations, all within the one command. When we're finished, we click Close and close again. And processing is complete.